This is the walkthrough recording on how to complete the Accounting 230 Financial Statement project. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to download the raw data set from Excel. And that's what you're looking at here on the screen. Then we're going to make a couple of changes to the data set to reformat it for our purposes. First thing we need to do is we need to click on Enable Editing up here on the top center. This is a feature that Excel uses to protect you from dangerous items that might be in files you would download from the internet. Since we downloaded this file from Canvas, we know that this file is safe. So we're going to click on Enable Editing. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to highlight all of the data columns, because we can see a little bit of our data here, like the year, but we can't read most of what we have here. So we're going to highlight all of these columns, and then we're going to spread our data out, and Excel can use a best fit approach to do that. And so we're going to double click right here in between two columns to allow Excel to spread our data out. But that didn't do quite what we wanted. It almost spread our data out a little bit too far, right, as you can see here. And the reason for that is in our data set, we have lots of different names. And so it's assigning some of these names based on different fields, okay, that are wider than others. So what we're going to do is we're going to narrow this to work with most of our fields so that we can still see our entire data set on a single screen, like this. So now we can see all of our data. And I'm going to come over here in the top left corner and click on cell A1. And so what we want to do now is we're going to change the formatting of this top row. So I'm going to change the formatting by first selecting the top row. So I'm going to hold down the Control button and hold down the Shift button while having cell A1 selected, and then I'm going to hit the right arrow. And you'll notice that selects my entire top row. So I'm going to come up here now, and I'm going to click on B for bold to change the format of that top row to bold, and I'm going to click on Center to center those headings at the top, so they look a little bit cleaner. Okay? Then I'm going to go over to my revenue table, and I'm going to make the same changes. So watch what happens as I come into the revenue table. So in the revenue table, again, I'm going to highlight all of my columns and double click between a column, between E and F, and that's going to spread all my data out. But what you'll notice is now all this data fits what? Fits on a single screen, so I don't have to resize everything, because our data has a few less categories in the revenue column, right, than what we had in our spending column. Now this time I'm going to select my top row, and I'm going to do it by highlighting it and dragging the mouse across the full top row. And I'm going to click on bold again, and then I'm going to click on center to make that adjustment. So we've cleaned up our data a little bit and made it a little bit more manageable for us to work with. Okay? So now we're going to make some more changes. First thing I'm going to do is we're going to address instruction number 1. And so I'm going to bring up instruction number 1. So this is our project instructions. And it says that we're going to use this video to construct an income statement for the 2019, 2020, and 2021 years. So that's what we're going to do. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to come down right here, click on Sheet, and we're going to make a new sheet. We're going to put that at the end. We're going to call it Instruction 1. Okay? And then on this new sheet, I'm going to put some space here at the top. We're going to come down and we're going to put Insert. We're going to click on Pivot Table. We're going to click on the top of Pivot Table right up here, not the bottom of Pivot Table. If you accidentally click on the bottom, you just click on From Table Range there as well. But if you click on the top of the pivot table, it will automatically assume you want From Table Range. Now this is going to bring up this screen that asks us, well, what is our range? What cells are we interested in making into a pivot table? We're going to go over to our revenue table right here. We're going to click on cell A1. I'm going to hold down the Control button, hold down Shift, and I'm going to hit the right arrow. Notice that selects the whole first row. So we're selecting cells A1 through G1 now. And now I'm going to do it again. Hold down Control, hold down Shift, and this time I'm going to push the down arrow. And now it's selecting the entire table ranging from cell A1 at the very top all the way down here in the bottom right-hand corner to G3303. And then I'm going to hit OK. So here's our pivot table. Okay? It doesn't look like a lot so far, but we're going to start making some changes. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a filter. Okay? So we're going to add fiscal year. Oops. We're going to grab fiscal year and drag it into filters. And then we're going to grab revenue type. Okay? And we're going to drag that into our rows. And then lastly, amount, and drag it to values. And notice what we've got now. So we've got what? A table laying out for a group of years our what? Our revenue here and the amounts that correspond to each of those. And you can see that for the data we have, this is our grand total. Okay, for all revenue. Remember, that's for multiple years. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of these dollar figures right here. I'm going to go back to the Home tab, and I'm going to click on the comma style button. That's going to add commas, okay, which makes all that a little bit easier to read. And then I'm going to click twice on decrease decimal. And watch what happens each time I do that. See the 67 cents that we have right here? As I click on decrease decimal, it eliminates the tenths place, or excuse me, eliminates the hundredths place, right? Leaving only what? The tenths place. And then as I click on it one more time, it eliminates that last decimal place, causing it to round up to 238 instead of 237.7. Okay? And so our data looks a little bit cleaner with those formatting changes. Now we can also make other changes up here. For example, I'm particularly interested in the data for the 2020 year. So I'm going to change our filter right here to the 2020 year. And now we're only seeing data from the 2020 year. Okay, so before, when we had what? All years, we were seeing what? All data provided in our data set, which is 19, 20, 21, and 22. But by clicking on 2020, we only see data in the 2020 data set. All right, so now we're not quite done, right? We've got these revenues in here, but as you guys know, an income statement has two distinct components, revenues and expenses. So now we're going to make a new pivot table by going back to the Insert tab and then clicking on Pivot Table again. And this time, when we create our pivot table, we're going to come down here to the spending sheet within Excel. And we're going to select the entirety of our spending sheet. Again, we're going to select A1 up there in the top right or top left corner. We're going to hold down the Control button, hold down the Shift button, and this time I'm going to hit the right arrow. And notice we've now selected the entire top row, right? Cells A1 here through I1 here. Now I'm going to do it again. Hold down Control, hold down Shift, and this time I'm going to hit the down arrow. And now we've selected all 46,000 data points from what? From A1 all the way through to I 46,767 right over here. And I'm going to hit OK. Okay. And so that brings us to this point. We've got now two pivot tables that we're looking at. And so we're going to start to collect our data. First, I'm going to grab amount. I'm going to drop amount under values. And notice that gives us a total. So we have the sum of all of our amounts that shows up here, right? So this is our total data. And then we have to think about, well, what's the best way to break out this data? Well, obviously we want to break it out by year again. So I'm going to add fiscal year under filters. And then we've got a lot of options here in terms of how to allocate the rows. So I'm going to make rows expenditure type. And now we can see the different types of expenditures, but these are not necessarily helpful to me, right? So I don't think expenditure type is what we want. So I'm going to remove expenditure type from our rows. What about activity? Well, that gives us definitely great detail, but it's almost too much detail, right? There are hundreds of rows, hundreds of separate activities. And that's almost too much for us. Okay? It's not practical to have an income statement that reports at that granular level. And one of the items you've got to do in this project is you've got to play around with the different tiers. And then for one of your requirements, you have to articulate why you chose particular items. I'm going to choose department for a moment. And so department gives us about, what is that, about maybe 20, 25 categories. And so that's a pretty good selection. So I'm going to come right here. And again, we're going to change the formatting. So I'm going to add the comma formatting. And then I'm going to what? Remove the decimals, decrease decimal twice to remove the pennies. And if you look at it, we've got essentially a rough income statement. I'm going to change this to match the 2020 fiscal year because that's what I'm interested in. Okay? And so now I've got a rough income statement for the 2020 fiscal year. Now I can change my formatting for that. If I come down here to the bottom, I can add net income. And then by putting in a new formula, I'm going to hit the equal sign. And then I'm going to click on my total revenue. And then hit the minus sign. And then I'm going to click on my total expenses and then hit enter. So our total revenue, or our net income, is this amount shown here. And I'm going to hit the comma format button to change the formatting of that. And then I'm going to remove 2 decimals to remove the pennies. So you'll notice our total revenue is what? 1.9 billion minus 1.7 billion gave the county 165 million in net income. Okay? And I'm going to bold both of these to clean up my format. Then we're going to come back up to the top. We're going to do a few other things to clean up our format. So I'm going to change the name of this row label here in the top pivot table. And I'm going to change it to revenue by simply typing revenue over it. And then in this column, which is right now called sum of amount, I'm not going to delete that. Watch what happens if I try to delete it. If I try to delete it, Excel won't let me delete it. It won't let me actually delete that entire cell. But I'm not interested in deleting the cell. What I want is I want it to change the words. I don't want to see the sum of amount. Ideally, I want to see nothing. So I'm going to hit the space bar. And now you can see that that cell shows no data. Then I'm going to come down here to revenue, and we'll say total revenue right here. And now we can see what the total revenue looks like. So this looks fairly clean. And we're going to come down here to expenses, and we're going to make the same changes. So I'm going to retitle this to be operating expenses. We're going to remove this by adding a space in instead. Then we're going to scroll down to our expenses. And I'm going to change this to total expenses. And this is starting to look like a real income statement, isn't it? Now, to get the formatting fully there, there's still a couple of changes that I need to make. So I'm going to come up here to the very top, and I'm going to add a heading. And I'm going to say, for our heading, I'm going to say that this is Pierce County, Washington. And then the statement is going to be an income statement. And then it's going to be for the year ended December 31, 2020. And then I'm going to highlight all this, and I'm going to click on bold to put that in bold. And then I'm going to highlight these 6 cells right here. And I'm going to right-click on that and go to Format Cells. And then I'm going to click on Alignment. And for my horizontal text alignment, notice right now it's set as General. I'm going to change this to Center Across Selection. And that's going to cause this heading to center across the cells I have selected right now. So it moves my heading into the middle. And then I'm going to hide my filters. So I'm going to highlight those rows and click on the Hide button. And Excel is going to hide those fields. And I'm going to click on these and right-click and click Hide. And now I've got what? I've got a very clean income statement for Pierce County for the 2020 year, clearly showing the revenues, clearly showing the operating expenses and the net income. I can clean it up even more by hiding the zero revenue accounts. So I can click right there and there to hide my zero revenue accounts. And we end up with a pretty nice picture, right, for Pierce County. I'm going to highlight the whole income statement, click on View, and I'm going to click on Zoom to Selection. That's going to zoom me out so I can see the entire income statement in one place. That doesn't look bad, does it? Right? So that looks like a fairly well-formatted income statement that tells us what happened in Pierce County during that particular period of time. Now, I've done this to build this for a single year. And for a year, this looks good. But this doesn't quite meet our project requirement, right? The project requirement is what? Income statement for the 19, 20, and 21 years. So we're supposed to actually have 3 income statements. So I could now copy this and I could clone this, okay, to make 3 new income statements. So I could come right down here, I could go to here, and I could go to Move or Copy, Move to End, create a copy, and now I have a duplicate, right? So here's 2020, and I could make a duplicate of this, and I could come in here and I could change my filter to make this 2021, and then I could come in here and unhide this and change my filter to make 2022, or 2021, excuse me, and then I could go back to my revenues because I hid some of my revenues and unhide those, and then rehide the revenue items that are still 0, right? Because they exist in our data set, but not in these particular years. And then rehide my filters, right? So I could do all that, okay? But that's kind of a lot of work, right? And it has to be redone for each year, okay? So this is essentially now our income statement for 2020. And this is essentially the same thing, but it's for 2021. And then I need to change my date right up here to 2021. So that's one way to get the multiple years we need. I'm going to show you a different way that's a little bit more efficient. So I'm going to make another copy of this worksheet. So I'm going to click right down here on Move or Copy, Move to End, create a copy, and hit OK. So now this is our second copy that we've made. And I'm going to come into our pivot tables. First, I'm going to unhide everything because I've got some hidden rows. Let me bring all those back. And I'm going to come into our pivot table setup, and I'm going to move fiscal year. So I'm going to move it over to column. And watch what happens when I move fiscal year over to column. So now we're seeing what? The revenues for Pierce County by year, right? And this is almost more helpful, right? So this is almost more helpful, okay? And I'm going to come down here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move this fiscal year filter out of filters and into columns. And now in our data set, we can see what? Okay? We can see that each of the different years and what's being shown for Pierce County. So essentially, this is an income statement for 19, 20, 21, and then we can see 22 here. We can't see these fields right here. I'm going to make that a little wider so I can see that field right there. And what you'll notice for 22 is we don't have a full year of data on 22. So some of the data is not yet available for Pierce County for the 22 year. And that's why we don't ask you in the project to do the 2022 data yet, right? We only run through 2021 because the 2022 data is not quite available yet. So to deal with the fact that 22 is not quite available yet, we're going to click on this field right here by column labels. And I'm going to uncheck 2022. And notice that's going to remove 2022 from my data set. And so what we're looking at right now is what? We're looking at income statements for Pierce County for the years what? 19, 20, and 21. Okay? We don't really need a total for these columns. So I'm going to hide this column just so we can see year by year. We're going to come down here, we're going to add net income for 2020 and 2021. To do that, I'm going to hit the equal sign, then click right up here on D20, which is what? Our total revenue for 2020. Then the minus sign, and I'm going to click right here on D53, which is the total expense. And then I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to do the same thing for 2021. Equal sign, we're going to click on E20, the total revenue, minus sign, and then we're going to click on E53, the total expenses. And then I'm going to take both of these and I'm going to change the formatting by going to Home, comma style right here, and we're going to remove 2 decimal places. And then I'm going to bold them to match what I did in 2019. So this shows you Pierce County's activity over this 3-year window. Now I'm going to come up to the top of my income statement. I'm also going to make some changes here to clean my formatting up. First, I'm going to say years ended December 31, leave the year off, and let these columns give us the specific year. Then I'm going to highlight this full section right here. I'm going to click on Format Cells and change my alignment to Center Across Selection. Hit OK, and notice that moves my heading. All right. Then I'm going to clean my format up a little bit more. So I'm going to highlight these 2 cells, or these 3 cells right here, these 3 rows. I'm going to hide them, cleaning it up a bit. And I'm going to do the same thing right here, essentially hiding the filter. Clean it up. And that looks pretty darn good, doesn't it? All right, so we clearly can see what? We can clearly see each year. Those look good. Let's hide these rows that have no activity. So we're going to hide the rows with no activity right here. And we've got a pretty decent looking income statement. We can even come in here and we can center our years. And so we're showing essentially 3 years of activity for Pierce County. So that's the first instruction, right? The part where you're asked to what? To use pivot tables in Excel to construct the income statement. So that meets our first requirement. Now, one thing you'll have to think about, and we've talked about this a little bit, is what fields you want to use for your revenues and expenses. When you're thinking about that, that relates, looking here at expenses, to which of these items you select as these options. Right now we've got it at department, but division, fund, program, activity, expenditure type, expenditure category, those are all potential candidates. On the revenue side, we've got it at revenue type, but we've got what? Department, division, fund, revenue category, all other potential options that we could have used. And so for your second instruction, you have to articulate why you chose which items. Then for our third item, we're going to add what are called spark lines to our income statement. Spark lines are a very basic visual analytic in Excel that allows us to track trends over time. So to add our spark lines, we're going to start right here. We're going to go to the Insert tab in Excel. And notice there's a spark lines box right over here. So there's several types of spark lines that are available to us. I'm going to select the line spark line. It's going to ask me what data range I want to be shown, and I'm going to show this row. And so if we zoom in a little bit so we can see this a little bit better, what it's showing us is a basic trend line. Right? So this is a basic trend line for our charges for service revenues for the county. And you can see the trend here, right? It's up significantly from 19 to 20, from 506 million to 568 million. Then it flattens out a little bit, and it's up a little tiny bit from 2020 to 2021. Okay? So now I'm going to come down a year, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to paste. Look at our next year. Okay, it matches, right? 28 million, 57 million, higher number, and then back down to 34 million. And so we can keep bringing this data down point by point, and it allows us to see different trends within our data. Essentially, it allows us to see what? It allows us to see visually how our data is behaving, which allows us to very rapidly reach conclusions about the state of the county government that we're looking at here. Now, it's inefficient for me to copy and paste these all down by hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find this little tiny thing in the bottom right-hand corner. You can see it's slightly different. I'm going to wait for that to turn to that black X. I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to drag it down. And you'll notice that that populates my spark lines all the way down. Okay? Then I'm going to do the same thing down here below. I'm going to keep dragging, but sometimes it's not meaningful. Like right here, this one's not meaningful. The fact that my year is continuously increasing is not meaningful. So I'm going to delete the one for year. Just come right here, and we're going to remove it. Okay? Oh, well, that didn't work. So we're going to come right here and go to Clear Contents and make it disappear. Well, that apparently doesn't work. So what we'll do then is we'll undo it, grab this one right here and copy it, and paste it right there. And then I can drag it down from there all the way to the end of my income statement. And so we can see how Pierce County is evolving over time, shown to us visually using our spark lines. Right? And that allows us to very rapidly reach and make conclusions about the data being presented. Now, we're not done yet. We have one more item we need to do under our instructions, right here, number 4, which is that we need to what? Make at least one visual analytic in Excel that tells a story about our income statement. And there are lots of visual analytics that can be created. So I'm going to zoom out so we have a little bit more space, and we can create our analytic over here on the right. Now I'm going to go up here to Insert, and you'll see that there are a number of recommended charts. Okay, so the number of charts that are going to show up here and different charts that can be created. Okay, I'm going to make a pie chart, and I'm going to make this a 2D pie chart. Okay, so here's our 2D pie chart. Then I'm going to click on Select Data right here, and I'm going to select Pierce County's revenue data. Okay, so this is Pierce County's revenue data, and I'm going to hit OK. And so here's Pierce County's revenue data pie chart for the 2019 year. Okay, and then I can change my filter here to show me different years. Right, there's 2020, there's 2021, so forth and so on. So I can make different changes to see different periods of data. And then to see all of them, I've got that. And you'll notice it's changing what? Both my table data over here and my chart data over here. Let me make this chart a little bit bigger. Okay, so that's my chart. And you'll notice for Pierce County, right, charges for services is one of their largest revenue categories. And over here, this one, which is intergovernmental, right, transfers from the state of Washington, is a little bit bigger. Their main one is this idea of service revenues. Now, in this chart, I can also play around with it. I can drag these out here to kind of break the parts out to give me more space to talk about them, right? So I can rearrange it in a couple different ways. Okay. I can also, if I right-click here, I can click on Add Data Label, and that will add the dollar amount for me. Or I can right-click on it and go to Add Data Callout, and that adds exactly what it is and tells me the percentage that it is. So there are lots of different items that I can do with this chart. And you've got the opportunity to build lots of other charts too, right? And each time, come right up here to Insert, and then you can go through the recommended charts, you can build line graphs, but you want to build at least one chart that's informative to you and that you're able to articulate what the chart does and what the chart provides to you. And then the final component of the project, okay, you want to address a couple of requirements. You want to determine the amount of revenue that the county had for 2019 through 2021. You want to determine how much the county sheriff spent in a particular year. And you want to articulate why you selected the revenue expense names that you did. Then you want to think about, in writing, what are the pros and cons of having more revenue items or fewer revenue items? And then what's the story that's told by your visual analytic? So your deliverables are going to be the spreadsheet that you've created, and then a Word document that includes, number one, a screenshot of your income statement, a screenshot of your analytic, and your written responses to these 5 questions listed right up here. All right, if you have any questions, please let your instructor know, and good luck on your project.